Why isn't, yeah, no, it looks like, we're going to call to order the Strategic Planning and External Relations Committee meeting. There we go. Okay. We'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And I guess before we go further, I should just announce, because we wouldn't have a quorum of presence under what we have listed here as committee members, but I was not aware until just now that several committee members were appointed temporarily over the weekend. So that would be, that were from the former committee, Commissioner or Councilman Schizler, and Director Melanie Williams, and on the phone, Commissioner Kimberly Overman.
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, just wanted to check again. And I guess, is Director Marvin Knight here? No?
Oh.
That's right. And Director Mechanic. And I guess Director Knight, who was here, is not present. Okay. So then we'll do approval of the minutes.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
And we'll start with then public comments, 3 minutes per speaker. Are there any public comments? Anyone? Okay, seeing none, we'll move to the presentations. Number 4, we have the Downtown Circulator 2020 update. Justin Willits.
Good morning. Good morning. Committee. I'm Justin Willits with Service Development. I'm going to give you a quick update on the downtowner. And I'll get right into it. So I know we have a pretty packed presentation. So I'm just going to give you a little background, talk about a March funding scenario, talk about some of the fixed route circulator options we came up with as tasked by the board when this was originally approved. And then I'll update you on the RFP that is our long-term plan to replace this service and enhance it and make some modifications. And we'll take questions and discuss anything that we covered. As we all know, this was started as a public-private partnership in 2016 between FDOT, the City of Tampa, local businesses, and the Downtown Partnership, providing an on-demand service that has carried about 560,000 passengers and does about 400 trips a day. 7 days a week. That, based on the subsidy that we are putting into the system, it's about a $5.60 per trip subsidy, which is comparable to our system-wide average. A little bit under the top 5 locations are Publix on Bayshore, the Ball Center at UT, Amelie Arena, Marion Transit Center, and Tico Energy downtown. This map gives you an idea of where the demand exists, primarily in the downtown core, but the Channel District, a little bit on Harbor Island. So back in August, we approved the extension of, or the funding of HART into the Downtowner program through the end of this March. The assumption at the time was really that we would have surtax resolution and perhaps know how we wanted to carry this program forward and how it should evolve by then. But we are coming up to the end, and we still are waiting for a resolution. And we want to figure out how we're going to either extend the service, how we're going to modify it in the future, and that gets us to where we are today. So, as I mentioned previously, the task that we had in service development was to come up to options to kind of transition away from a point-to-point zero fare system to something that's more circulator based. So we've come up with a variety of options, and I'm just going to walk you through some of those options that have various funding, either no funding attached to them, can be eligible for the FDOT match, which is 50%, which is what the existing service is using, and then how we think that this should evolve within the next RFP when we select a new vendor. So the first recommendations are what we would operate with the fixed route trolley if we had the money to operate additional services right now. The first alignment is actually the streetcar extension. We've costed this out at about $52,000 a month for a single vehicle to operate this alignment. This serves a lot of the existing trips that people are taking on the Downtowner. A lot of people are using it for remote parking, and we think we can capture a lot of that demand on the fixed route, and then kind of decrease the wait times on the existing Downtowner service, however it does evolve, and just allocate those resources into the fixed route system, and kind of take some of the burden off of our other routes that are feeding into downtown. The second circulator option we're proposing and looking into with some private funding partners, is a one-way circulator from the Channel District down to the Water Street area over to Ashley and back on Twiggs. There's a significant amount of demand in the Channel District coming over to the core of downtown, and also based on conversations we've had with the city and the CRA and some of the private stakeholders, they're really interested in this route, so we feel like we may be able to attract some private dollars to the table. So those are two specific to in-town trolley fixed routes that would not be available for the FDOT funding. What I would get into now is some service concepts that would be available for that FDOT funding and be more of an on-demand type of service. And really why we want to keep exploring that avenue is because we're operating in a financially constrained environment until we have some resolution. And the benefits of the grant funding are that they allow us to test concepts at a reduced cost, allow us to build upon what's already been learned to date by our experience with the Downtowner, and can help point people to our existing transit services. And this is a big deal for us because we've actually been, over the last few months, the Downtowner has modified its app to where if you request a ride and you're within a close proximity of the streetcar and your destination is within close proximity of the streetcar, it points you to that service so that it doesn't generate a trip on this with the Downtowner vehicles. And that's really important because we're trying to get more people on our existing services so it's not as necessary to provide a service like this. And that's something I'll touch on as we talk about the next RFP as well. When we issue that RFP, we're going to make sure that it's flexible enough that we can expand to additional service areas that have various amounts of funding available for this type of service. We're going to replace the Downtowner point-to-point service with a fare, which is something we haven't been able to do within the existing construct of the Downtowner. It would require additional funding. So we haven't got to that point yet, which is why we're part of many reasons why we're going with this new vendor, which could be the Downtowner, but we are going to do our own selection. So the flex type circulators would basically be a circulator that is allowed to deviate a limited number of times per trip per hour. Basically, if you pull up the app and your trip makes sense either on the streetcar or one of the circulators that we would roll out, it would point you to those circulators and not create a trip for you to pay point to point like the existing Downtowner provides. So we would introduce a fare to encourage people to get on a fixed route. So part of the RFP requirements are going to require that the proposers demonstrate the ability to procure in these vehicles, provide electric point-to-point accessible transit vehicles for flex circulators, and demonstrate the ability to have a single application for all services, both point-to-point and flex circulators. And then again, point customers to our existing services. So, and here's, sorry, John's a little bit ahead there. So, as we consider service options under the umbrella with the 50% match from DOT, we have similar concepts to what we would like to operate with a fixed route, but as I said, we're still operating in a financially constrained environment, so we're entertaining these same types of service concepts with the DOT match, where we would have to deviate through an on-demand platform. But we've got to the point where we have these concepts that, if implemented as designed, that they would satisfy that on-demand feature that the funding from DOT is tied to. So basically, you see here again the streetcar extension, and what we would do is allow a single deviation, either per trip or per hour, to serve some of those generators that aren't necessarily within a 2 or 3 block walk of the service. And this is just a draft concept set. This is not final. But that would give us the ability to build ridership along the streetcar extension and still utilize that DOT funding. One of the other concepts that we've been entertaining is similar to the old Route 3, for those of you that have been around here a long time. And basically this would also capture a lot of the existing demand on the downtowner route, specifically from the Channel District across the river to UT. And we feel like the deviations on each end, whenever requested, would really make a lot of sense and make this a great service. We're currently trying to explore funding partnership with TGH. So if we're not successful in attracting some of their capital, then we would probably go with something more that's more look like this, a little bit shorter, really captures a lot of the demand we're talking about, and then would only pop over to UT and Grand Central upon request. So we could run a very frequent circulator service with limited deviations. So our overall goals moving forward are to enhance mobility downtown and point people to HART's existing service, provide more predictable circulation, consider service options that can be operated by HART or a selected vendor, utilize funding opportunities through DOT, and explore private partnerships and CRA funding. And of course, the RFP is still dependent on surtax to operate. So the details on the MOU and action item are an agreement for a minimum of 3 months to extend April, May, and June at $64,000 a month, which is a slightly reduced level of service based on the existing funds left in the grant. So we're going to be scaling back just a little bit, but we're requesting that additional months beyond June be optional based on the timing of our RFP, when we can replace this service with a service that I've described. The committee action item, I will read to HART service development staff, direction of the HART board, develop a proposal. An on-demand transportation service not to exceed $192,000 a month, with additional months optional on a month-to-month basis at $64,000 per month until September 30th, 2020, contingent on the availability of funds. We are scheduled to meet with the CRAs and the CRA board to propose that they fill the funding gap of $32,000 per month, which is our balance, the local match. And if they are not able to fill that match, this is not a budgeted item in our budget, so it would have to come from our reserves, or we could discontinue the service at the end of March. That's basically it, and I'll take any questions.
I have a couple questions.
Commission.
You have a question?
Yeah, I do.
Director Shanahan.
How many of these are unique riders of the 560,854? Are they unique riders or are they duplicative?
Are you mean more than one passenger?
No, I mean more than, like, are they repeat riders? Like, what's the percentage of unique ridership?
I'm sure that they mostly are. There's a lot of repeat customers, but there's also some promotions by the hotels and stuff, so there's probably quite a few unique, but I don't.
What percentage of these are visitors, tourists? Why would the hotels be promoting them? I mean, that to me is relevant data, because then the visitors, I would lean in on the visitors group that collects a lot of money for the tax beds if they're visitors. I mean, so we should know if these are unique riders. I mean, are people using this for their day-to-day transportation, or are they using this for when they're in town visiting? And if there's a percentage of the volume of passengers that are visitors, I would think we could seek some participation money from whatever that organization is officially called, but they collect the tax and they've got a lot of money. But we should also know, just for our own knowledge base, how many of these are repeat riders or unique riders, as you call them unique visitors on your website. So that means they are new visitors.
We agree, and I know that the downtown partnership vigorously pursued those funding partnerships, but did not have a tremendous amount of success. They operate a lot of their own shuttles too, so they have the kind of embedded transportation costs already, so that was part of maybe why.
Well, that was my other question. Is this duplicative services to other like organizations that we should be using? I mean, the one thing this board has is a lot of elected officials that both represent a lot of those constituents as well as probably guide their funding. And, is there a way to somehow look at this in a little bit more coordinated fashion? So we're not, I don't know how many other places have shuttle services that are downtown, but this clearly gets fairly significant usage. And like if you shut it down in March, will there be an impact in downtown?
There'll be an impact. I mean, people have been using it as remote parking shuttle. People have used it to get to and from MTC. But there's a lot of services out there that aren't being utilized that could be. This is filling a gap, but without a price on it, we can't really gauge the demand. So that's why we want to implement some more transit-like circulator type things. Charge a fare that's somewhere more than our fixed route bus, but less than a minimum Uber, say, for example, and find out where that demand actually is. And we just haven't been able to do that under the existing.
FDOT, yeah. Yeah, and I think that's I like the strategy of what you're trying to get at and see what's the real volume of usage. But I do think that there should be probably somebody that takes on this leverage of too many services doing the same thing.
That's a long concern I think the partnership has expressed about all the different shuttles that the hotels run. And they're kind of just legacy. They've been there for so long that they just don't know anything different. So it's part of the culture shift towards transit we're trying to work on in general. But
Well, we should also have a culture shift in terms of climate change and sustainability. And we don't need to be running all these cars with big gas, whatever, all over downtown if they're running empty or they're not being utilized.
these are electric vehicles, so they're a little bit.
Yours are.
The current downtown. I
Yeah,
believe.
no, but I'm sure the hotel
Oh,
are not.
Yes.
Thank you.
Director McKenna.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. My own anecdotal feeling about this is it's mostly local riders. The hot spots are UT, Marion Transit Center, and that's important because that means that's a first mile, last mile opportunity that we're serving and drawing people to the bus system. I had a question. You're not asking us to vote on one of these options today, right? This is something you want to study in the interim period through September,
We're just
is that right?
requesting the flexibility to get some city funding to help fill the gap while we get this new service ready to go.
Right, but you're not
Because-
looking to choose one of these options today?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. One thing about that RFP that I would suggest is that I know it includes West Shore and the university area. You know, given that those are all three are unique in terms of its own requirements, and I would suggest that an RFP not require that the same provider provide all three service areas. It could be that one provider is more capable of providing a service in one area versus another, you know.
Well, we're trying to select a single vendor that has the flexibility to do all of these things so that it's a bit cleaner and we have flexibility in how we roll it out, right? So if on-demand just makes a lot more sense in a certain area, then we can just do that with a small fare. If circulators make more sense in another, then we can operate that.
I'm just saying I wouldn't suggest that you legally structure the RFP so that you have no choice. I mean, I think it should allow for you to pick one vendor versus another, depending on what the capabilities are of each of the respondents, that's all. I mean, you may wind up picking one for all three, but you just wouldn't want to I don't think you want to lock the board into picking all or nothing from one person, you know.
We'll definitely include that in our
Thank you.
development of the RFP.
Any other questions? Well, I have several. Is there any example of any metro area in the nation that provides, through their transit agency, on-demand transit? Any example of that anywhere?
Off the top of my head, I don't have one, but I know there are similar services all over. But if they flow directly through the transit agency, I'm not.
Right. I can imagine similar services, but I can't imagine anything going through a transit agency that is spending the dollars for on-demand transit and having kind of the metrics that this system has. It really, I can't see a way that makes sense. Are we going to continue to procure the Teslas? I know their contract was expiring in March.
No, the Teslas have been, they're returned.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's just the Chevy Bolts that the downtown is using.
Okay. And the 560, you keep mentioning that as a per trip on this, the subsidy, but what, for instance, is a subsidy on the 1 or the 32 going to Hillsborough, the one at Florida?
They're all around, the higher performing routes are anywhere from $2.50 to $4.
Right, so that's a lot less. And a downtown route, you would expect, and I know many other transit agencies do have even free circulator buses, like Seattle, and all kinds of places. And so, and those are very low cost, even lower because of the, if they do a regular route and they have a robust service, they can do far lower costs than the one that you're suggesting to subsidize this service. Also, I know there's been substantial waits over time for these vehicles, and it doesn't show any promise of being scalable.
So the history of the circulators in downtown, when they were fare-free, they were fairly successful. When a fare was introduced, their ridership declined rapidly. I think you would probably see a similar trend if we introduced a fare on the downtowner service. They have reduced wait times, so the delivery of their service has improved a lot. But like I said, you can't really gauge the demand off of something that has no cost. But I agree with some of your...
And why wouldn't we want to introduce a fare? I mean, you're talking about doing that, right? That would seem to me to make total sense.
Based on our conversations with the downtowner and underneath this existing agreement, we don't have the flexibility to roll that out, especially when we're about to transition off of it. So we're kind of have to do another selection and get a new vendor. And it could be that they propose and they have more time to roll out a fare system and some of the other things that we put in here. But we just aren't able to get it done underneath the existing contract, and we'd like to do a procurement through our agency for this service.
And I know also the Marion Transit Station as a main place was mentioned, but I've been told that massively it's not people getting off buses, but parking in that area.
I've heard that as well. We do know some of our customers are using it and are happy with it, but exactly how much of those Marion Transit Center origin destinations, we're not exactly sure.
And then I'm confused because this Tampa to Florida Street circulator, so this would be a bus, or would this be a small vehicle?
So, we've proposed a couple of different things here. One being a in-town trolley, traditional fixed route circulator on that early slide. But we also would have an option under this new RFP, if we wanted to go after the FDOT match for 50%, that we could operate it as a very similar service, but allow it to just deviate slightly based on a request from specific geographic areas. And therefore, we would get a really nice circulator out of it, but also have the availability of only funding it at 50% because it would be allowed to deviate. So there's a couple of options in there. We'd love to run the true circulator option, but we wanted to make sure that we're entertaining options that are available for the 50% match based on our current financials.
But we could do it for a lot less without the 50% match, probably for under the 50% cost, if we weren't doing a micro-transit kind of solution. I just don't know. And this is this route, isn't this where the one already goes, pretty much?
Basically, yes.
Yeah, so right now, we have a bus running in this corridor that people, I mean, practically exactly this already. That's pretty frequent. And so that we could be using that without, and just starting to advertise it and let people know that was available on the one. The other one, the other circulator, which I get, I'm honestly confused about why we wouldn't just do a square around downtown basically, which I thought that that's what the former, when they showed the pickup points that that was shown to us from the Downtowner Now, the 5 points where it's picking up, it seemed to have formed kind of a square through downtown.
Yeah, but I don't think those were really kind of trip directions. Those were probably just major generators, but I'm not exactly sure.
But it would seem like that would be a good, I mean, I thought that's what the research was for, to try to connect those points. And also I can see where UT, we could continue to serve them, but the students could just walk across the bridge there. It's a nice walk. It's pretty much basic to just do just one circulator through downtown that covers the routes that other service, the Downtowner covers now, basically with the main points. I thought that was the point of bringing that forward. And my only final comment is, I don't know why we would, I mean, if the hotels are willing to do their own, transit and have their own vans going around, I'm not, I like, that would be fine for, that's fine. I've heard, I'm thinking about in Southern California and Silicon Valley, how one of the transit agencies was upset that Google and Facebook were having their own huge bus fleet. And I was like, that's great. They can have their own bus fleet, and then it's not the public cost, it was the agencies that wanted somehow it was the companies that somehow wanted the public to pay for that, or had thought about that or talked about it. But they were perfectly fine. I'm fine with the hotels doing their own.
I just want to clarify, Karen corrected me. It's not as many as I thought it was. There's only a handful that
Right.
actually provide their own shuttles, so, for whatever that's worth.
Which I think is just like, that's fine. That gets people through and serves people. And I just don't know if we were doing microtransit, why we wouldn't be charging for it. But what if we did a bus service, which followed that microtransit route that was put to us a few months ago, why we couldn't just do that service for free, and we could do it under the cost of, even without the FDOT subsidy. We could provide a very robust service through downtown for free. I think when I look at the numbers that are provided.
Yeah, the $32,000 a year for the local contribution has about 6 downtowner vehicles on the street at all times. It would cost us anywhere from $40,000 to $52,000 to operate a single transit vehicle, based on our estimates. So there is some benefit to using them. We just think that it needs to be under a new contract, because there are some efficiencies and cost savings by using the grant. But we are happy to explore all options, and when funding becomes more available, service development staff will happily recommend several circulators for downtown, probably some version of what we've discussed today.
So today, the action item is, can you just, again, to clarify, because I know Director Mechanic was asking, today you're asking us to approve exactly what?
To approve the MOU under the contingent upon the availability of funding, which we are going to ask the CRAs to fill the gap, because as you've stated, the concerns of this agency are that we've been filling a gap that it sounds like you're not sure that we should have been. But we want to get the CRAs to help us preserve this service as it exists up until the point we're able to roll out a new vendor that can operate a variety of things, including a fare for point-to-point. If the CRA does not come up with funding. This is a non-budgeted item for this year. We would have to get approval from the board to either dip into our reserves, or we can discontinue the service at the end of this March. So those are the options.
And the RFP is already back and responded to?
No, it hasn't gone out yet.
Okay.
It hasn't even gone out yet. That's what their briefing is on.
Okay, which I had heard about. I just wanted to check because I've been given all kinds of information at different times. Okay, and I understood that I know that there was some work done on that at some time. Okay, so this would just be to extend the service, and you'll come back to us for approval before the RFP?
No, for the
For the RFP?
Yes, we would have to bring that back to the board.
You'd have to bring back the RFP.
To be clear,
Yes.
Brandon's the Director of Procurement, to be clear, we wouldn't have to seek board approval for release of a solicitation, but the resulting contract from that solicitation will be presented to the
Right,
board.
that's what I have issues with. Because the RFP is kind of defining what the future service will be after this, but is this to follow through with FDOT's contract, the money that they have already allocated? Because
It's to match through the end of this fiscal year, which is why we want the flexibility to go beyond that until we can stand up the next service. But it is utilizing the existing grant funding allocated for this year. Cindy, is that correct?
Okay.
Do you want the CFO to explain the funding and so what's left and why we want to go ahead and do this with that?
Well, they did that once, but in a prior meeting, but no, I think it would be valuable.
Okay, Justin, would you please pull up slide 32 and we'll have our CFO come and explain where the FDOT funding comes in and part the Sun funding. It may add some clarity to the questions before us.
Good morning, Cindy
Slide
Stiglitz,
32 where you have the action item, or,
interim CFO for HART.
okay, that one.
So back in August, HART was awarded $380,000 from FDOT, which needed to also be matched by HART for a total of $760,000. We entered into a contract for 8 months with the Downtown Partnership at approximately $71,000 a month, which we were then going to match at 50%. So that left a balance of $192,000 from April 1 through June 30th. That's the balance that we're asking the board to approve, to use as, the 1 year of service to mitigate or to fill the gap in service until we are able to put our own solution on the street. In July of this year, we're expecting another $1.3 million, which we will also have to match as well. So to take us through September 30th, we would still be looking at an unbudgeted expense today because this service was predicated on our sales tax. So in the budget, we have only budgeted our 50% through March. That's why I've made it clear that we do not have this budgeted in the remainder of the budget. And so it is, we would be looking to dip into our reserves to fill that gap.
Right, and that was a concern that I raised months ago and saw this as an issue, and I could see us providing much less costly service with a route in here, which we haven't in the interim done, rather than micro-transit, door-to-door with this continued solution. So by approving this, moving forward here and with the board, we're approving dipping into our reserves for another $190,000.
If we went through the balance of the fiscal year up until September 30th. That's correct.
And
But that's not what's proposed. What's proposed is through June, and how much is that amount?
That would be half of 192, so 96.
That would be HART money, no FDOT money.
That, it would be 96 from each entity, and when we say HART money, it's really local match, so that's why we're appealing to the CRAs to see if they would be amenable to filling that $96,000 match.
And could that CRA money be used for other projects at HART?
I assume so.
Yeah, that's a conversation we're gonna have with them also, is once we have a new vendor and roll out a new service, what our partnership could look like.
But I think the chairman's questioning even the value of a new service. That's what I'm hearing you say.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And to continue,
So to toss this up to the big board, she's saying we're just sort of moving it along with the assumption that we would continue to take money down for a service that is duplicative. Do we really need to do blah, blah, blah? Is that correct?
that's correct, but also, and I'm very concerned about the state of our budget, even right to this minute. And continuing this, what is a very costly service, and I think we were on, months ago, we discussed this, and I expressed these same concerns, and I'm concerned that it,
No, and but months ago, it was like they woke up and said, okay, in a month, we have to stop servicing this. So there was a surprise factor.
Right.
So we've been on the record for trying to work this through for 3 or
Exactly.
4 months. And from my perspective, now, if this is the best example that we have to do something, I'm not in favor of going forward as it's currently proposed, whatever we think we're voting on. But I don't think the presentation was clear with what we were voting on today
Right.
to send to the big board. And sending a signal of like, this RFP is going to be okay is really, I sort of thought we were going to get a lot more data based on the conversation that we had many months ago when it was sort of like a rut-row, we don't have enough money to continue this, and we approved doing that for a period of time to then come back. So, I don't know, I'm not, it sounds like there's a lot of what I took out of the presentation, there's a lot of duplicative services. This is not really, it's a point-to-point, and there are people that are using it instead of paying for a bus or for Lyft, or they're not visitors. Those would be my 3 summary points, that if asked in the business community why we stopped this service, that I would advocate for that. Are those fair summary points? Based on the material presented. And that FDOT, I don't worry about, FDOT money unless it's not useful or we can't reuse the money. And I don't know if going back to FDOT, there's other ways to do it. And the CRAs, there's, you guys talk about like it's all these different pots of money, but the CRAs haven't stepped up to match the current match, correct?
Not yet.
Yeah.
So, and to your point, FDOT has put some parameters around the way in which this funding can be used. So we are trying to look at solutions that will maximize their contribution. And that is why Justin gave multiple options, some of which are not funded, that will not ever be funded through FDOT under the current grant.
I would like to ask, starting in March, if this service were to not be funded, would we possibly have time to start a circulator on the same route that were the points of the, and get some costs and understand that with a bus?
Even if HART comes out of pocket to stand the service up for the next few months to bridge the gap, it's going to be far cheaper than us operating a circulator vehicle, just one. It's way cheaper for us to maintain this service with 6 vehicles on the street 7 days a week than it is for us to operate one single fixed route bus on any type of circulator in downtown. And maintaining a 15-minute headway with one vehicle and having a layover for our operators is a tall order that is very unlikely to be effective and would then increase the costs to make sure it was operationalized, approved by safety and operations and the rest of the agency staff.
And because I've seen a lot of the routes priced out at 250,000. I thought with the some of the routes I've seen, I find it, I would like to see some other options here that make more sense.
I feel like we're in a downtown or in a circulator because, and I am sympathetic to staff's challenge in terms of where the funding comes from and the constraints on the funding. So that's sort of, and then you try to create a program around that, and then we have a program that's somewhat successful with some of the key partnerships in downtown. But when we really look at what we're providing service for, it sounds like it's not necessarily as it was intended, or there's duplicity in the system. I mean, I think there's, I just didn't like it the last time because it was like at the last minute, we were saying we're going to withdraw the partnership.
I don't know if there's any other questions. Yes.
Madam Chair, thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak. Before you today, we're just asking to participate with the service to approve this MOU, to actually participate from April through June. That is funded, correct, Cindy?
It is
No,
not.
it's not funded?
It is funded by FDOT, but we're still looking for the local match.
All right.
Okay.
This is Commissioner Overman.
Yes.
I too have a lot of questions about what will be included in the MOU. Let me see if I can fix this. Back up. Having the variety of routes, having not worked through the negotiations with the CRA or the city on this extension, and putting possibly the match at risk, and the fact that it's not actually in our budget is concerning. At this point, I would imagine there's more work that needs to be done in order to get to a place where we actually understand what the MOU is. But given that it's not budgeted, it is concerning. And there's little in my opinion, there's little interest in taking on $64,000 a month or $192 with additional options month to month is concerning, given that we haven't any resolution on the surtax, which would be where these resources would need to come, given that they currently are not in our 2020 budget. So I think this is premature, but I recognize that we've got several options, and if we're going to be working with a vendor as well as two other partners, the CRA and the city, as well as FDOT, that we need to get those details thought through, especially given that we do not have the surtax to operate this service. Whether we charge for it or not, there does appear to be some duplication. The route that we're seeing on slide, and I'm looking at the materials that were sent in the backup information. I can't see your screen, but it was slide 13 that talked about operate the flex circulator on demand attributes. That appears to be what will be the streetcar extension. And did I understand it to mean that there is a bus circulator that does that route already? The Tampa to Florida
The one
goes
does
up to
that.
Palm and back down to downtown?
That's correct. But it is
So
a
there's
fair-
already a circulator in that location, is that correct?
It's not technically a circulator, but the Route 1 does circulate along a similar alignment that deviates to Marion Transit Center. The reason that we've proposed that route in service development is because the demand exists for that type of pattern that is not served in a true circulator fashion, and we think it will also benefit in the long term our FTA application for the streetcar extension. So it serves an existing travel demand and a future need, and can also benefit some projects. That currently, if you wanted to ride the Route 1 north on that alignment that we've proposed, it would go into Marion and lay over for about 10 minutes, and then it would continue on. So it's a similar service that does overlap, but it is not currently a circulator on Route 1, just to be
Okay.
clear about why we went with that route.
And then the second slide, thank you for clarifying that, that's helpful. Second service is the downtown flex circulator one that goes from Ybor to Davis Island. Is that a current route? Is there overlap on our current bus services on that route, or is this all on demand with a fixed route?
So that is an old route. It was the old Route 3. Currently, that trip cannot be made in a single seat ride, which is why we're proposing. It serves a need that the streetcar doesn't currently serve, and also gets people from Ybor through downtown, potentially across the river, depending on what the final extents would be, which is further down the road in the planning scenario. But it does reduce travel times by transit from Ybor, not only to downtown, but also potentially across the river. So it fills a void in our service currently.
And does it qualify for FDOT matching if we are able to find the partners match?
If we allow for the deviation at specific areas, then yes, it would, based on our conversations with DOT.
Okay. And then the last one is just the circulator from near the port back to UT and back, correct?
Yeah, that's the shortened version.
Jackson Kennedy?
Correct.
Okay. And that again would qualify for matching from FDOT?
If it were allowed to deviate, yes.
Okay. Okay. Well, I'm still, without knowing the outcome of the surtax, I'm hesitant. So if we can get some commitment from the city and or CRAs, we can move further along those conversations, then putting it out to a vendor to meet those specs would be the next step, and I can see. But I'm not saying that we have those details worked through at this point to even put out an RFP, but I'm maybe not understanding the process.
So we have a couple, I'll just announce that committee member Rich McLean is on the phone, HART board. And I don't know if you have questions, Mr. McLean, but we also have Councilman Schisler. You have some questions?
Yes.
You're
Yeah.
recognized.
Yeah, Commissioner Kemp, thank you. This is Rich.
Okay.
If I could, I just want to express my concerns over, similar to Commissioner Overman and a few others. I've had the pleasure of utilizing the service. Good service, but part of mine is how do I justify, as we've mentioned already, a $64,000 a month expense, and the way it supports that community down there, particularly as we move away from what I would call the partnership that funds that and move it into a more transit funding process. So I think all my concerns have been expressed there. I just wanted to kind of say, yes, I agree with those concerns. I do look at this a little harder before moving forward, and I would even say before moving it to a full board look. Primarily along the lines of the usage, how it's used, and how it would benefit the overall transit process in that area. When I used it of course is for short duration trips and all. And for me, it seemed to be used primarily for the businesses right downtown, in support of the businesses right downtown. And so moving that away from that kind of funding, i.e. the local businesses and a partnership downtown, to a more transit funding process, to me is I'm a little confused in that and a little baffled by that. But I'll stop right. I do have concerns on the funding process, how it really links into the overall transit piece that we need down there, and then of course who is really kind of on the hook to fund this, if you will, and I don't want to say on the hook, who should be normally funding this. So I'll stop right there. Commissioner Kemp, and thank you for the time.
Thank you. And Director Schisler?
Thank you. I think that the presentation, there's a lot of information in here, and I don't want to beat this horse any more than we already have, because there's stuff in here that we're not here to deal with today, where I don't believe that we're here to evaluate and prosecute the individual options that are out there. I believe that's going to have to come at a later date whenever the RFP comes back with their information. I believe that our action item for this is to move this forward to the board meeting, because we need to do something financially before the end of March, when the matching funding evaporates or whatever, or at least continues what we did back in August. So I'd like to move this thing forward, because we're spinning our wheels, and it's going to have to be a whole nother discussion on the RFP again, and the results of the RFP, as well as what are we going to do when we have the next board meeting. So I would like to move that, I'm not in favor, I'm not in favor of spending any more money on this from a budgetary perspective. We got hit with the last minute, like, we got a problem here, we have to act, so we did that. But I don't think enough's been done in the interim to answer the questions. Again, we're hog-tied because of the referendum issue being tied up in Tallahassee. So I would like to move it forward and take this in the form of a motion, if you will, that we move the MOU forward to the full board, but that we're not in favor of continuing it after March without some type of resolution through the CRAs or whoever other partners can step up. We just don't have it in the budget. We have to be in a conservative, frugal manner and say, if we don't have it, we can't pay this.
I second it.
So it's a motion to move it forward to the board with our objections to continuing.
Correct.
Okay, so that's what we have. We have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? Okay, seeing no further discussion. All those in favor of moving it forward to the board with our objections to not approve this? I mean, that's how I hear this. All those in favor of that, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Is there opposed? Okay, so it's unanimous with this committee that we don't want to move forward with this. We'll express that to the board, move this on to the board with our unanimous objections to going forward with this plan.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and we wanted to get it to this board for full discussion rather than wait until March, because we knew that it was going to expire in March and we didn't want to come at the last minute to you. So that's why we put it on for today.
Yep.
I'm glad we had a little more notice than we had last time. So we'll move forward here to the Envision streetcar project update.
Good morning, I'm Steve Shoecraft with HDR. I'm the project manager for the streetcar modernization and extension project. It's a project that's been underway for the last couple of years to look at the potential for both modernization of the existing system and extension through the core downtown. So the goal today is to give you a brief update on the status of the project, and then to alert you that we'll be coming back over the next couple months as we work through the funding and finance plan in more details as we move through the process for some actions for the board to approve what we'll be presenting ultimately to FTA at the end of next summer for the rating submittal, which scores the project and queues it up for eventual funding as we move through the later phases of design. So a quick overview, the intent of this project since we started it was to look at the creating a system that supports downtown as a more livable, connected, and competitive destination within the region. As it's been scoped and as I mentioned, it's to look at modernization and extension of the existing system to improve access across the core of the city. And as you know, downtown, and if you count Ybor City, Tampa Heights, the core of downtown, it's a pretty large footprint beyond a typical walking distance across the full extent of it. To continue to connect premier tourist destinations, cultural destinations, educational destinations, and add more to that list to deliver first mile, last mile connectivity for regional services, and to set the stage for future extensions for the system. So the project is being led currently by the City of Tampa. The current project is the feasibility study and project development phase. The city and with partnership with DOT are funding the project, and we've been working with HART through this effort since the beginning. As you know, the context for downtown has changed dramatically over the last several years, and there's more significant investment in the pipeline. All that's occurring without the possibility of substantial local roadway capacity, so transit really is the solution for how we connect across this broad footprint of how downtown's defined. These are some quick numbers, but what we're talking about ultimately is the total potential for $5 to $6 billion of private investment downtown with no new significant roadway capacity to move folks around and to connect those destinations. We like to highlight what's occurred over the last year with DOT's funding to remove fares, extend the hours of service, and improve the frequency of the system. We've seen a significant increase in ridership, and we've seen that increase continue fairly steadily across that year. So what I assumed early on was there might be a novelty factor, that when that fare was taken away, people would try it out for a little while and then it might taper off a little bit. It's actually stayed very strong, and it's continued over the last couple months. So this goes to September, so this is fiscal year to fiscal year. But what we've seen over the last, what we saw in October and November were continuing robust ridership increases, looking at about 3 times the levels of use of the system with that small change over the last year. And what we're on track for now, based on the first quarter of this fiscal year, is to see ridership of around 1 million. So that's a significant increase over what it was a couple years ago when we were hovering around a 300,000 point. The current work on the project, we've been working on the steps of documentation to look at the best performing extension alternative for the corridor, but we've been going through the process of documenting information to prepare for the rating submittal next summer to FTA. So that includes the ongoing coordination with FTA. We're in the project, we've recognized as being within the project development phase of the project with FTA. We've gone through the process of identifying and selecting the preferred alternative. We're working through the NEPA and 106 review process. The documentation has been developed and submitted to FTA, and so that coordination process is underway with interested parties associated with potential impacts. The ridership modeling that we have scheduled will follow on the onboard survey that HART will be preparing over the next couple months. So when that onboard origin destination information is available, we'll run the stops model, and we'll have our ridership estimates pulled together. The city is working with HART to clarify the governance agreements, to clarify ownership and responsibility for existing operations and maintenance, but also looking at the future for design, construction, and operations of an extended system. And we're in the early stages of developing a detailed funding and implementation plan, which lays out costs for design, construction, and operations. We have to prepare a 20-year budget for the project, indicating sources of funding and uses of funding, and that's part of what gets submitted to FTA next summer. So that's what we'll be back to the board, the full board, with more information about that plan, the share of local funding, the uses of local funding to support the project's implementation. During the process that we're under now, we've had significant public involvement, public engagement. I know that several of you have seen me present updates on this project multiple times in different venues. We've had 5 large-scale public workshops with 100 plus in each of those, with high levels of interaction and engagement. As we walk through the purpose of the project, through additional ideas about corridors for extension, to decisions about the alignment and more details about how the service would be provided. We've had coordination meetings across the board with all the major projects influencing transit conditions downtown. That includes Brightline, Virgin, the regional rapid transit, I guess it's called regional rapid transit now, the 275 corridor BRT system, the Heights Mobility Study, and the arterial BRT project. Oh, and I went ahead of myself. So that's what we have, these overlapping potential investments. So we're looking at how they interface. The most direct interface would be using the proposed guideway for streetcar to serve the north-south BRT project, so that the BRT vehicles could share the guideway and stops So we'll be coordinating at a greater level of detail as we move into 30% design for streetcar project. What we're really talking about for the system is a one-seat trip from end to end. So from Ybor City through downtown, north to Tampa Heights, full-day frequent service, high-capacity vehicles, level boarding to take out one of the significant barriers to the existing system for ADA accessibility. And then design for shared use by other vehicles. So initially BRT and potentially in the future autonomous vehicles and other vehicles could share the guideway and share the stops. We're looking at ways to minimize impact on or maximize travel time reliability for the streetcar system, but minimize impact on the roadway network, avoid conflicts with significant left turns and right turns, especially when we cross 275 at the downtown interchange, and looking at minimizing impact on streetscapes and sidewalks, and also improve the pedestrian environment broadly downtown along the corridors. So the project is two parts, modernization and extension. The way we've defined it currently is the extension is eligible for FTA money, modernization is not, but we're working with FTA now to try to combine the projects. So modernization and an extension are eligible, and I'll talk a little bit more about that as I go forward. So modernization is improvements along the existing line to run a modern streetcar vehicle, so more capacity, easier accessibility, and then to extend that system through the core of downtown, north to Tampa Heights at Palm Avenue, along the Florida and Tampa pair. And then that sets the project up for potential extension either north or west, depending on how future studies proceed. The extension is about a 1.3 route mile extension, so it's 2.6 track, but 1.3 route mile. Following the existing traffic pattern, north on Florida, south on Tampa. That would be a mostly exclusive guideway operations, and there's a potential, right now we have it defined as running in mixed traffic on the north end of Florida, where Florida narrows as you turn from the grid and head due north. There's a potential for a lane elimination in that stretch of the corridor, so we could run in an exclusive guideway through the full extent of the project. What we're looking at is a system that provides access on the right-hand side of the vehicle, so the stops could be used by buses, which have doors on the right-hand side, or by the streetcar, which has doors on both sides. This is the broad overview, and I know this is probably difficult to read, but we can dive into more detail if we need to. If you think about Florida Avenue, we run on the left-hand side of the street, up Florida Avenue, with a parking lane outside of that, and then 3 lanes of traffic. And that parking lane gets used for our stop footprints. So their stop footprints are on islands out in the parking lane. It looks a lot like Jackson. So when you think about Jackson and you go down Jackson with the cycle track, if you think about the streetcar line like the cycle track, it's that same basic street section. It would proceed north on Florida. It would move to the right-hand side of Florida, where it would run in mixed traffic, and that would push the stop on the side of Marion Transit Center, which is convenient for access to Marion Transit Center. Run north through the downtown interchange, left on Palm, and then come into an exclusive guideway on Tampa, and run on the inside lane, so the left-hand side looking down south on Tampa, on the left-hand side through downtown, turning at Whiting, and then connecting back to the system. We did an evaluation of the vehicle technologies. The type of streetcar is a common vehicle. There's a few different options on the table, slightly different sizes, slightly different widths. But these are the most common in operation across the United States. They meet federal requirements for America-compliant parts and equipment with significantly more capacity than the existing streetcar systems. The stops, as I mentioned, if you think of this section as looking north on Florida Avenue, where that stop is would be a parking lane or a left turn lane until we needed it for a stop, and then that stop would be in that island configuration. It would have a high platform, allow for level boarding, so strollers, wheelchairs, bikes could be wheeled on the vehicle without steps or without a special ramp deployment. For the modernization improvements along the existing line to run modern streetcar, we need to make 3 basic types of location-specific improvements, and then we have to upgrade the overhead contact system or traction power system to run the vehicles. The guideway reconstruction involved smoothing out some of the tight turns in several locations. That's because the vehicles require a greater turning radius than new vehicles require a greater turning radius than the existing vehicles. The stations would be improved within the footprint of the existing stops. We would reconstruct the existing platform to raise the platform level with ramps on both ends, but we don't need additional real estate to do that. That can happen within the footprint of the stops. Replace the shelters in the historic districts to meet that early commitment for mitigation purposes, and then look at potentially reusing or redesigning the stops for the locations outside of the historic district. And then this facility would require modification to house and to work on, maintain the new vehicle fleet. So we're looking at an extension that would go out into the yard, reconstruct the track in the yard, and then we'll be moving into a design process to look more carefully at exactly what the reconfigured condition is. So that'll be something that comes up over the next 6 months when we move into 30% design. So we're maintaining a big draft stamp on all these documents where we talk about costs, because we're working through the funding process now and the project definition process. Right now, we have $237 million project defined. That's in 2024, 2025 dollars. So that's been escalated to year of expenditure, and that's a requirement for FTA to look at the money when we're spending it, not what the value of that money is now. The way that we've been carrying costs on the project is a proportional share of the new vehicles and a proportional share of the maintenance facility gets split between the modernization project and the extension project. And as I mentioned, we're trying to combine that with FTA so we don't have to carry two separate pots of money. It would be defined as a single project. That would make us eligible for additional federal money to support the total project. And then the $8 million for operation and maintenance in the future, that's again a number that's been escalated to opening year 2024, 2025. It's a very conservative number at this point based on a very conservative estimate of the number of vehicles that would be in service to provide a 10-minute headway service. So we're looking at that number possibly to come down, but again, we're going to work through that over the next 6 months, come back with a more tightly defined O&M costs. The breakdown as we carry it forward, we follow the FTA requirements for how we define costs on the project. So we're providing information based on that methodology. This is the split. One of the things you can see here is that the modern streetcar vehicles are expensive. So as we look at refining our operations plan, we're carrying 10 vehicles, a requirement for 10 vehicles to provide 10-minute headway service across the full span of the day. We're hoping to get that number down so we can pull that back a little bit, but we have to work through that process. That'll be an early stage of 30% design when we update the operations plan. The way that the project is defined currently in FTA's eyes, they're only looking at the extension portion of the project as eligible for federal money. So you can see this spreadsheet shows if we go for 50% federal money for the extension, that's $66 million. The non-federal share is split between FDOT and the locals, and then the locals would be split between HART, the city, and other sources. So you can see the breakdown broadly, that's on the second table on that page. $66 million would be the federal capital improvement grant small starts program funding. Half of that non-federal share would be DOT, half would be local. And then we've indicated those sources, but we are starting to work through the process of allocating those sources and the uses of those funding. And that will be providing more information to you over the next couple months. So this springtime process we're in now is completing the project development effort. The current phase of work kicking off the design and engineering process. It's all for transportation contingent, so there's a chance there'll be a hiccup if that money doesn't come through, and we'll be looking for other sources of money to continue the project. And then the city has been talking with HART about initiating a future extension study while 30% design proceeds. So that would be looking at west to West Shore or north or some other configuration. And we haven't been, I'm not sure how that's going to be advertised and what the focus of that study will be yet. At the end of next summer, we need to be prepared for our submittal for our small starts rating submittal. It's not an application, but it's sort of part of that long process to get to a grant agreement with FTA. That's when we deliver our financial plan, ridership information, economic development and land use information, and then FTA will score the project, medium to medium high. We think we look good for a medium high rating. And then as we continue through the process of design, the project gets better defined and 30% design, those ratings will be updated and revised as we move through the process to get ultimately a grant. So we're looking at construction to occur in 2023, 2024, with the start of service in late 2024, early 2025. We also are working on, as 30% design process proceeds, that schedule will become more refined, more carefully refined, and those target dates for construction and start of service will be more clearly pinned down. So again, we're not asking for specific action at this meeting, but I just wanted to give you an update on the project and let you know that we'll be back over the next couple months. Initially looking at the funding and finance shares, so thinking about which portions of HART's offer transportation money, cities offer transportation money are available for construction and then ultimately for operations.
Are there any questions? I'll ask a few or just make a few points. I know I've been through the same presentation at our MPO, and it generated quite some discussion. But I just wanted to, I'm glad you gave, I know I'd asked the operating costs before, and it's right now, and I know you said it's a conservative estimate, so by conservative, a high estimate of $8 million a year, which kind of took me back, because I know that FDOT was subsidizing the current service we have and making it available for free at $1 million a year. So I was surprised. It would be, if it were totally done by this agency, even with the offer transportation, it would be quite an expenditure in operations for what is essentially a very small route. So I'm just bringing that to the attention of the board, because I'm always watching the operational costs and thinking about when we move forward on that.
You're just for reference, your current operating costs, I think the FY19 costs were $2.5 million, so DOT supported a portion of that.
Oh, I see. So
Yeah.
we are doing about, thank you for clarifying, because I was just kind of taken aback. So right now it's $2.5 million. And who pays the operating the other $1.5 million? HART does?
No, it's not actually. HART is the contract operator, so that money is sort of collected and delivered to HART to operate the system. One of the major sources is the Special Service District downtown.
I see.
For a streetcar, and that's generating, I think it was $1 million last year, but that'll be a significant uptick as more development hits the ground. So it operates a bit like a TIP district.
And it seems like, honestly, too, the tourist tax that we have should be partially.
Potentially eligible.
Yeah,
correct.
for funding the operations, which is not something that was done. The county commission is approving that and, made no move to do that this year. But I hope that in the future, they'll be looking at that, because it seems like if we did this, service is costly. Again, in terms of operations, I think we would really need to look, because as to your point, Director Shanahan, this is, I think, a very tourist robust service. And so I would think that would be something that we would be looking for that source of income.
Yeah, we'll have a better handle on the origin, destination, and special purpose trips when the origin destination survey is completed by HART staff, well, with the consultant, but we'll be able to know that more specifically with a percent of tourists, local users, commute trips. We'll have trip purpose defined through that exercise.
And finally, this could still be, because the type of vehicle technology isn't established, it could still be a rubber tire?
We're proceeding with modern streetcar vehicles, so that would be on rail.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify that. Okay, I have no further questions. Anybody else? No. Okay, so we will move on. Thank you very much for that presentation. And we have the Plant City, we certainly have the CSX corridor evaluation history. We have a long agenda this time.
Yeah, I have to go, Madam Chair, I have to leave. I have a noon business call every Monday.
Well, maybe,
that
I know,
have to be on.
I'm amazed at everything on here, and the first discussion turned out to be pretty, a large discussion. I'm wondering if we might, maybe the board could, right, I'm just trying to figure out what we should do here now, because this agenda is so packed, and I'm thinking, I'm sorry, I'm thinking that maybe we should just move to the, if we had I guess we would need a vote to waive the order of the agenda and move up. I'm looking for the, page 3, thank you. The authorizing the chief executive,
The action items?
yeah, the B.
So moved.
Second.
Okay. All those, it sounds like everybody's in favor. Any objections?
None here.
Okay. So we will move now to the action items and move forward. And I'm looking, I guess the first, we've covered the first one, so let's go to B. That's a big deal. And maybe we can, if you could make that presentation, thank you, Chris Cochran.
Good morning, committee members. Chris Cochran, Director of Service Development. Do not have any formal presentations for these, but I'll go over the action items as they're presented in the agenda packet here. The first one, item B, is to authorize the interim chief executive officer to award a contract to perform the FTA Transit-Oriented Development Pilot Program that we have presented to y'all in the past, to HDR Engineering in a amount not to exceed $879,109. This study will essentially examine and evaluate the performance of existing TOD policies for the city of Tampa and Hillsborough County in relation to two projects, both the streetcar alignment and the Tampa arterial BRT alignment. Our recommendation is to move forward with awarding that contract to HDR.
Okay. Do we have any discussions or questions on that?
Is that connected to the Envision's Tampa streetcar that we just saw? I mean,
Well, yes, ma'am, that is the streetcar alignment. It is not, it is connected to it in the sense that this study will overlap, looking at portions of that alignment and how TOD opportunities, TOD land use policies would interact with that corridor. Most likely, in particular, the Palm Avenue and Florida intersection there, specific for the streetcar. And then other locations that will be identified through the arterial BRT alignment up all the way up to Fowler and over to the university, up Florida and over to the university on Fowler Avenue.
okay, I move approval.
And is there a second?
I'll second it, but I do have a question.
Is that, Commissioner Overman, you're recognized?
Yes, thank you. Chris, I wanted to ask you the question regarding the BRT, the TOD that goes all the way up to Fowler in Florida. Can you share with me, based on this development study, how much interaction you'll have with various different commissioners, both of the county and the land use folks? What does this process look like?
Well, that will be, there will certainly be a a lot of interaction with stakeholders and the board as well as part of this project. It will be certainly affordable housing will be looked at. We're looking at the possibility of bringing in Taryn, I apologize, her last name, from USF.
Fabia.
Thank you.
Fabia.
As somebody for HART to consult on this to ensure that we are looking at everything as well. So yes, there will be a lot of, there's a lot involved in this study and as well as the BRT and the streetcar and looking at all of these studies that are in this corridor. There's just so much going on. So it's impossible for us not to really be comprehensive about looking at everything that's going on. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does, and that's why I brought it up. There is a lot of moving parts going on with the county land use and comprehensive plan right now that this process could actually serve us well as long as you're using soon to be adopted, let's just put it that way, process and not looking at historical positioning, because there's a lot going on in this particular area right now, so. That's why I asked about the input and what level of negotiation or at least input gathering is going to be included in this particular RFP.
Ma'am.
Thank you, Mrs. Chair.
Thank
Director
you.
Williams.
Thank you. I guess my question would be around 879, so 879,000, and we reviewed this material earlier. Was there an estimated cost at the time when it was initially reviewed?
Yeah, so let me give you the breakdown of the financial impact here. So FTA funding is $800,000 that they're providing us. HART will be funding $80,000 cash. And then we have in-kind contributions of $80,000 from the Hillsborough County City County Planning Commission and $40,000 of in-kind contribution from the City of Tampa.
But I think what she's asking, was there a budget presented with an amount needed to do the study, or are we just getting the money and then spending the money on the study?
Thank you.
I believe we did present the necessary match that was necessary for this in presenting this prior.
Did HDR, when they bid on this, present a budget to do this work, irrespective of the funding?
Yes, they did.
And what was that number?
That number off the top of your head?
Initially, or the initial selection was, it was a CCNA selection, so it was selection on qualifications. And then we negotiated with staff, and that 879 was our final number.
So is this first recommendation of the 879? I'm here on loan today temporarily. I just want to get an understanding of the 879, if it's part of previous conversations, or is this the first time we're being presented with the 879?
Well, the 879 is the final contract that will be paid to HDR.
Right.
Yes.
I understand that.
So this is the first time that you're seeing that number, then, yes.
Okay. I guess I don't have a frame of reference, and I mentioned this in the last meeting, that if we're asking for money or talking about dollars or numbers, we need to have a frame of reference. 879, I don't know if that's a lot, if it's not too much, or is it if reasonable? Is there, how do I base, what basis am I to use to give this feedback, other than the feedback that we're going to use someone else's $800,000 versus our own?
I mean, this was cut down significantly. We went back and forth and negotiated this contract. It did come in significantly more, particularly in one of the upfront original tasks, and we were able to negotiate that number down to a number that we were comfortable, that is what we felt to be reasonable for what is needed for a project of this scale.
Okay, I'm not being fresh, but I'm not comfortable with your response. $800,000. I know it's $80,000 for HART, and if there was a correlation, when you provide documentation to the board, we'd like to understand where we're going and where we came from. How do we get here?
So John Edmondson, Director of Procurement. The original cost estimate for the project was based largely on the grant funding that was available to fund the project. When the original cost came in after HDR was selected, we were able to negotiate them down to the request of $879 that we present to you today. And that price of $879 is based largely on the hourly rates being charged for each participant from the consulting firm and the level of effort required in order to complete the work. That price has been deemed to be fair and reasonable based on the hourly rates for other consulting agencies within our jurisdiction and just nationwide, performing similar types of work.
Okay, I
Go ahead.
don't have any other questions.
And I was just, when you first said this, I was a little confused, and we don't have any kind of written specifics, which I think is probably what we would like to see. Something, I mean, than just a number and little information about this. But did you just say Palm Avenue? Because I just wondered when you had mentioned Palm Avenue. I mean, this is a long corridor, and there's the USF area with all huge redevelopment, potentially there, and at Fowler, Nebraska, and I just heard Palm Avenue.
Well, I'm just giving an example of, I'm giving an example of the idea of how this would work. It's been suggested that there's a potential for there to be some sort of station area within that area. This is to look at station areas specific and within a designated distance of station areas that will be identified along that corridor, and looking at existing land use policy that will contribute to better opportunities for transit-oriented development along this corridor. And those station area locations will be based on recommendations that are made in both of these studies.
Okay, so this is about stations.
Station areas, not very specific sites, but station areas, yes.
I see. Okay. I feel like there's been so little information given about exactly what this is, and I'm really uncomfortable with the lack of information. I mean, just, I don't know why
Well, I would follow the Director Chisler's former action, where we would send it to the board, but with advice to the presenter to give more context around the history. Like when you say it came in with a lot more and you've negotiated it down, the point I was trying to get at, are you spending up to an amount because that was the award? But what were they responding to? What was the RFP? So wherein lies what was negotiated away to get to the 879 in terms of services that are necessary to do the study to be effective, to give counsel, which is, I'm hearing the study is going to be used for multiple applications. So having a sense of that versus just 879 is a big number around here. And I think we probably need a little bit more context. So I'm happy sending it up to the board, but I think that presentation needs to be made at the board meeting. That would be my motion.
Okay.
And I would second that. This is Member McLean.
I have one comment that I'd like to make on this, and again, we're beating another horse, but I go back to several meetings. I brought this up at several other meetings. Do we actually know how many studies we have going on concurrently? Do we look and see how many? Is there somebody with a master spreadsheet of all the studies that we have going on? How many of them are potentially duplicative? And again, this is just, I'm in favor of moving it forward, but it's just every 3 and 4 approvals for this study. Now we're studying this, and now we're studying to say maybe we haven't missed anything on Palm Avenue. I don't know. I'm sorry, get off my soapbox on that.
Madam Chairman, what I'm going to do is have staff defer taking this. Is there a deadline for this, Mr. Cochran?
It would be preferred to get this done at the next meeting, and I would be happy to put together a presentation that is a review of what we have presented to you all in the past on it, and give you some more details on how we arrived at the number per your request, if that's acceptable. We do have a deadline as to when this money can be spent based on the.
What's that deadline?
2021, December 31st, 2021.
Then what we'll do, Madam Chairman, with your permission, is that we will, rather than take this to the full board at the next meeting, we'll come back to this committee with the additional information requested and the detail requested, and that way, when we take it to the full board, it will be hopefully with the consent of this committee without reservations.
I think that would be much preferred, so I guess we're going to continue this, sorry.
Thank you.
We have a motion on the floor. Did we want to, would there be another, a motion to continue this?
When's this next committee meeting?
Next month, it should be.
Okay, so you're just.
I'll
delaying it.
rescind, I'll rescind my second and
Okay.
ask that, we get specific specs on this, because the first thing that sort of caught my eye was that the overview suggests that the terms of the contract be addressed the existing POD policies for Hillsborough County, and those are in flux at the moment. So just having an opportunity to look at the scope of the contract language would be helpful.
Understood.
I'll withdraw the motion.
Okay. So we have a motion to continue. Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, motion to continue a second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Hearing none, okay, so we move it forward with the motion to continue.
Okay. Item C is to authorize the interim chief executive officer to award a contract for the execution of a network evaluation and short-term service plan to Kinetics Transportation Group Incorporated in a amount not to exceed $405,155. This project is to develop a short-term bus operations plan to feed into a major 30-year transit development plan solicited in the future. Both of these efforts will be coordinated through a separate public outreach contract with various other studies ongoing that include the HART TOD study and the arterial bus rapid transit study. So the recommendations of staff is that the Strategic Planning and External Relations Committee review the action item authorizing the interim chief executive officer to award a contract for the execution of a network evaluation and short-term plan to Kinetics Transportation Group Incorporated in the amount not to exceed $405,155 and advance this item to the full HART Board of Directors at the February 3rd, 2020 regular board meeting.
So moved. Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second, and I have many questions, and I don't support doing this for a number of reasons. One is, I think the board, this committee, and the full board should be aware that this might be one of the most important decisions that we make at this organization on any of our time on this board. I had asked before that we review an RFP of this, and that was never done. And I understood that the RFP was coming to our board to have us look at that, and that was never done prior to this. And the next thing I knew was that the RFP had not only been sent out, but it had already been responded to, and that we were going to be presented to this full request to approve it. I think we have significant questions about our procurement process and the way things have gone, and we have an open investigation going on. So I think it is not time to do this to approve this RFP with the questions, and I have very significant questions about how this was done. We also turned out to have 2 applicants, that's it, 2 groups of applicants to this in all. For us to have a major transit project that defines our future like this and have only 2 applicants, one that I think is unquestionably wholly unqualified to move, so that we end up with just one primary applicant. And even that applicant has a very modest record only locally of even transit work. I just think it's, at very least, this RFP needs to be reconsidered. We should revisit it and get some more robust choices for us to have on this. And I'd just like to point out, too, that this solicitation, in the solicitation, which I found, I don't know what to say about it, created its own committee to move forward a single suggestion to this board. And I consider that the province of the board, public policy-wise. They included in here creating a committee that judged what our future system would be. And it's here that this committee, which are appointments, one from the HART board, whereas and one from the city of Tampa and one from Hillsborough County, but I mean, that's what this board is about, and that's why it is devised this way, that they would, this committee would identify preferred at-grade dedicated guideway transit alignments, building off previously completed studies of local transit corridors that include consideration of 75% dedicated right-of-way operations. So I think that this is, I'm extremely concerned about moving this forward in its current form. I would not be supporting.
This is read as a 2-year plan. It's a 2-year plan to feed into a longer-term plan.
I understand,
And
but
so, I don't know.
it's a definitionally, it starts our future. It starts our future for our more robust finding, and I think that we should be looking at this and taking it deadly seriously. And it also is this committee, that's not a committee of this board, which it should be, and it should be this board, is this committee of individuals that would identify preferred at-grade dedicated guideway transit alignments, building off previously completed studies. That's our future. This dedicated right-of-way, whether that's CSX, whether it's BRT, whether it's a mix of those, and, the different, we should really be exercising some control over this. And also, I look at, the application process, which I cannot imagine other communities having only this interest and only having 2 applicants for such a major project. I have real questions about this RFP, and I really think the RFP has been done, as we're under investigation, or as we're investigating some of our.
I think you're surmising a lot. You're combining a lot of anecdotal circumstances into statements of fact. They said 28 people withdrew, or I read it, 28 people pulled down the RFP. This is for 2 years. A lot of companies don't do 2-year, RFPs. They just don't. It's too short of a time frame. It's not like this is a 20-year study. This is a 2-year study. We're not even paying any money for it, so there must be time around the money, is what I assumed. That was going to be one of my questions, that they have to spend the money by a certain time period, like the gentleman explained before, 2020. And so for you to take, all of these issues in terms of, and combine them into statements like that, suspecting the process of procurement, our job is not to do procurement. Our job is to have the procurement person do procurement. So they went through an analysis. They had a full-bodied commission. If you read all the people that were on the evaluation committee representing every constituency in this area, you pulled it all because you're micromanaging the process.
No, I
And
just
so
like to have a
I'm saying that there were 28 people, I'm reading the facts in the public documents, 28 people pulled it down. I don't know how many people submitted. They had 2 people scored out. They had a full-bodied committee that looked at this with representatives from, I think, every constituent here, and they made a recommendation. And there's 2 years to do this study, and you're making it out to be this, and we all know that you're a CSX person. So everybody knows that, and you're an anti-BRT person. You've been very public about that in every conversation I've ever had around this policy issue. And I don't think it's fair for the chairman of a committee to have a personal agenda when the process was followed. And I feel really bad because I do have a business call every Monday at noon that I run with 10 people, and I have to be on it. But I think somebody needs to just step back and realize that if you have an agenda, you should make that in front of the whole board, but you can't control the committee priorities because of your personal agenda.
Well, I think leveling, I'm trying to put this on a non-personal basis. This has nothing to do with a personal agenda of mine. And in fact, I'm not anti-BRT. I'm a huge BRT supporter. I mean, there may not be a BRT supporter.
Madam Chairman, if I might interject, I know this is an important colloquy, but we're about to lose our quorum.
Right.
So, and we need to either move this forward to the board without a recommendation, if that's our position, or pursuant to a motion and you vote
Motion
on
on the floor. And a second.
Yeah, and there's a second.
Move it to the board.
Is there any further discussion?
I would like to make one comment. This RFP is dependent on, or is based on the idea that we have surtax revenues that would require a longer-term plan. Given that we have some question about the surtax and its validity and whether or not it can be immediately available is going to be a problem. If we're postponing it until after we get a ruling with the surtax, would that be an appropriate call to action? Not questioning those that have applied or the RFP or the process. But it appears as though this plan or this scope of services is based on the idea that we have the surtax revenue coming in shortly.
This is actually not completely dependent on the IOC. We have 300,000, this is a federally funded project. $300,000 of it would be available for funding. Our goal would be to fund the first $300,000 of the project and the remainder of it be optional, contingent upon the IOC funding. So there is a great deal of this project that would be able to be done. Certainly by then we would know if we had the IOC funding and we could get a lot out of that $300,000. In particular, the origin and destination survey, which is an FTA requirement that we are in our 6th year, we have to do regardless.
Okay, well, I just questioned in the background description of the RFP that there was much reference to, a 30-year major plan based on the life cycle of the new surtax. So I just was curious if it turns out we don't have a surtax, what happens with this contract?
Yeah, we would still be able to do 75% of the work, which is we would get a great deal of benefit out of.
Okay, I just needed that question answered. Thank you very much.
Excuse me, I'm chair here. And we have a member who's asking questions.
We can't hear.
Well, then, they apparently can hear, I can hear, so I know it's not the best, but we have a commissioner who's asking questions.
I'm good.
And would you, Commissioner, are you suggesting a substitute motion that we postpone?
No.
Okay.
I just needed to get clarity on the scope of the project before I voted, that's all.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
And I will definitely, I've been personally, instead of, dealing with the issues, there have been implications made about my personal basis for this. My personal basis is nothing to do with CSX or being anti-BRT, which is not a characterization that's true at all. I don't even know. It has nothing to do with CSX, but it has everything to do with getting a robust, this is a very, very important decision that's made. It has everything to do with getting a robust RFP and getting, robust responses to that. And
If I could just add some context, there were 28 vendors that downloaded and reviewed the solicitation materials. The two proposals that we received represent work being performed by 9 of those 28 vendors. That's nearly a 33% response rate. That's phenomenal in any procurement process. Secondly, we had a 20% DBE goal attainment for this particular contract, and the awarded vendor is a DBE certified firm and would be performing 46% of the contract work. That's more than doubling the DBE goal attainment. By those measures alone, this is a highly successful procurement process.
well, I don't know places that for this kind of project would get basically what is one application by a principal, which is the same application that was made, the same principal of T-BARTA, which was the only single principal on that application as well, which may be what you're speaking about.
In context,
And
we're not
with,
asking.
excuse me, and with limited experience in this area. I mean, both of these principals have such limited resumes in these areas that it's kind of shocking that we didn't get any applications from, or any bids from different transit providers that do this kind of work in other areas, or without any more experience or depth than these two providers that are the two principals. I think it's really points to our RFP and our RFP process. So I think that's an issue.
I think that's not a fair accusation, for the record. I think that's a very unfair accusation. And I think you should be very careful. You should be very careful in the roles of procurement and the roles that they sign up to do and the process they run through. You should be very careful about allegations such as that.
Well, I'd like to make sure that I think this needs to be, when we have only 2 bids that are made.
You just said you had 9 people work together on the bids. You totally throw out facts
No,
that
we have 2 bids
prove
that
your
are made.
point.
It's 2 bids that are made. It could have been in any one of those other things we could have had
Well, maybe
principals.
you
We
want
have
to be
2
director of
principals.
procurement in addition to the other hats that you wear in the county. I mean, come on, really? You want me to call out all the names for the record that voted on these? The respected members of their facilities and engagements that participated in this process and approved this? Really? You're calling into question. This is the technical committee, the evaluation committee, 2 members of the HART staff, director of bus operations and Chris, Director of Service Development, 1 planner from the city of Tampa, 1 from the city of Temple Terrace, from the city of Plant City, and the Hillsborough Metropolitan MPO for Transportation, Sarah McKinley. You're calling into question all of their integrity because you think that it's not appropriate that only 2 people got rated, when really it's representative of, as the gentleman just said, 9 out of the 28 people that pulled it down. I just am like.
Well, you're wholly
So you have a
mischaracterizing.
personal
Excuse me.
agenda here. You
No, I
have-
don't.
Yes, you do. Somewhere there's an agenda in here.
You're
And it will come
totally-
out eventually.
You're totally mischaracterizing anything by listing
I'm
those.
just not going to let you get away with calling in
Excuse me.
their personal and professional integrity. Because
And I
procurement
did
people
not.
have professional integrity, along with a lot of other lines
You're-
of government service.
You're
They follow-
characterizing-
I am
you're
not, ma'am.
characterizing
I am
the-
not, Madam Chairman.
This is an issue for the whole board in any event. We need to either move it to the whole board with their
Excuse-
favorable or unfavorable
Well,
recommendation.
I have the floor here.
I understand,
Yeah,
but you're
and
going to
I've
have to
been-
get the board to
it's-
go along with you.
I understand, and I'm not, but I don't appreciate being mischaracterized in what I am moving forward. If this came to me with just these 2, I would have gone with the principal, the kinetics with Tyndale Oliver as a principal between the 2, but we end up with only 2. 2 bids, that's it. And I think that is, I think that we really need to look at what process where we only get 2 bids. I think that is I would like to have that process redone, and especially in light of the issues that we have right now, and especially in light of the the importance of this RFP as we move forward. I think we need to have also the way it's written with a particular committee. And, I've been through this before, the singular recommendation rather than the choice of the community and of this board to choose.
Okay, you've officially lost your quorum, so we can't take any official action. You can speak, you could continue to speak, which you could have done after the
I
vote as
understand.
well. But we're not going to have any action, so this one will have to be taken out of virtue of no quorum.
Her whole point was to not have the vote. That's her whole point, to use her chairmanship as a personal agenda.
So has the motion died due to the lack of quorum?
Yes.
Yeah, that's
Yes.
a good question.
And again, I would just like to respond, that was not my point at all, but someone took up a lot of time making personal accusations rather than, I think, dealing with the facts of this. And I'm very concerned, I was concerned on T-BARTA, we had a single bid, one of these, and moving it forward, and I voted against that at the time. And we have had, in essence, the same thing here, and I have questions about that, and I think we need to I think we should have more than 2 bids, especially one, and I would have gone along with that committee and their recommendation between these 2 bids, for certain. I think there's no question about that, but I think, we need to be, I just am looking at why we're not having more robust bidding for such an important and significant future, our future here. And so I'm very concerned about, I was concerned about moving this forward, but I didn't do this because of that. I did this because I want to make clear the discussion. It's nothing to do with personal, it's nothing to do with preference in terms of what I would like to see moving forward, but I'd like to see this board making that decision moving forward, not a committee that's designed by an RFP. It's just kind of strikes me as shocking. As I said before, I had requested to see the RFP and to have this board see the RFP, and was told it was being prepared, and the next thing I knew was actually, it wasn't even being prepared or moving forward, but it had been totally completed with a recommendation ready to go. So that was my concern. Yes.
Madam Chairman, I just want to take the opportunity to thank the gentleman at the podium. Thank you for the presentations. Obviously, some other work that needs to be done, but I do appreciate your attempt in asking questions and providing further clarity. Thank
I
you.
can just make one point from my experience. What's challenging in Tampa Bay is we are not a robust transit area. So for many other firms, for them to invest in bringing people to Tampa Bay to do these types of studies right now to get the referendum funding is certainly going to be a challenge. I think as soon as we are able to get our surtax funding, we will see a dynamic shift in what you are talking about. But for $400,000, that certainly is a challenge for a lot of people to make the investment in placing people here, and being able to make cost affordable bids, because they would have to fly people in here constantly. I think that's something to keep in mind. But I think I do feel confident that what we have here in the Kinetics contract opportunity are for the 2-year short-term evaluation is a very quality opportunity, and I certainly understand the concerns about the committee, but ultimately you all are the board, and you do have opportunities to make the final decision. So that's not taken away from the board. So with that, I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. I don't know if there's any other.
Yeah.
Yes.
This is Board Member McLean.
Yes.
Yeah, and I listened to all the debates, and so I just want to say that, number one, we had a motion on the floor, we had a second, and we failed to act while we had a quorum. So with that said, I think you leave and this is a committee, not a board, this is a committee. I think we've left this pretty open, and I think we've confused quite a lot of folks, not only the committee members, but possible board members that are talking right or listening in. And then, of course, we left that committee that selected this contractor, and I'm sure we left that contractor in limbo. So my question to you and the committee is, what is the next step for this? Are we going to review this again? Or are we going to bring it up for a vote again to move it forward to the board? What are the next steps for this?
What are we? I think, I would imagine that this, it looks like Mr. Smith is ready to answer this. I would imagine this just moves to the board without a recommendation either way.
I would recommend it move to the board without a recommendation. Those you acted on,
Okay.
move with the recommendation you made. Those you didn't act on, move forward without a recommendation.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much, David.
And I'll just say, I don't think either way, a recommendation without discussion would have necessarily, this will be brought to the board, and I thought discussion was appropriate. So I don't know if there's any other questions. I think we don't even have a motion to move the agenda items to the next agenda, so I'm just thinking about the items that we did not deal with.
Basically, just to recap, item number 1 will go to the board with the recommendation against it. Then that's the recommendation on downtowner. The next one was the first item under B, 5B. That's the item that you approved with that's item number B will come back to this board, then to this committee, I'm sorry. Item C would move forward to the board with no recommendation because you had no quorum. Then we have item D, and technically, I guess item D would go straight to the full board too with no recommendation because you did not get to that item.
Okay.
And then you had the 2 presentations. One was the CSX that you requested that we bring back to you, and the other one was an MPO overview regarding the Plant City Master Plan study. Those are the 2 business items, 2 presentations.
Okay.
So Ms. Allman is here for the CSX presentation.
Well, I don't think we
that you
should proceed
requested.
with that at this
Okay.
point. I think Ms. Alden we can get she'll agree to be, yes, thank you very much.
Okay, you want to defer the Plant City overview to the next
Yes,
committee meeting also?
Just so we're clear for the record, when you lose a quorum, there's only 4 different things that a committee can do. You can fix the time to which to adjourn to establish a quorum. This is according to Robert's Rules of Order. You can adjourn, you can recess, or you can take other measures to create a
I think we
quorum.
should adjourn,
So yes, ma'am.
I would say. Okay, great, thank you.